They were young, just married, and madly in love. Celebrating their very first wedding anniversary with an off-grid hike through the dramatic cliffs of White Rock Canyon. No cell service, no itinerary, just a simple plan for a quiet day in nature. Some cake under the sun, and maybe a few photos to remember it by. But Megan and Tyler Prescott never made it back. They vanished without a trace. For 6 years, their disappearance remained one of Nevada's quietest heartbreaks. No bodies, no phone signals, no evidence, just an empty car at a dusty trailhead and 2 devastated families clinging to hope. Then, one morning, a lone camper took a wrong turn on a dried-out side trail and stumbled upon something buried beneath loose rocks, something small, rusted, and heartbreakingly human. A discovery that would unravel everything investigators thought they knew and finally shed light on a mystery long buried by sun, silence, and stone. Tyler had chosen White Rock Canyon for a reason. It wasn't crowded like Zion or cliché like the Vegas Strip. It was wild. It's untouched, a place where you could stand on top of a boulder and hear only your own heartbeat. Megan had packed light, 2 refillable water jugs, a little anniversary cake, in a cooler, and a handwritten card she never got the chance to give him. She wore her favorite dusty rose tank top and had braided her hair early that morning, laughing at how pioneerish she looked in the side mirror of their hatchback. They checked in with the park ranger around 9 a.m. By noon. They were deep into the canyon. By 7:45 p.m., they were gone. Search teams spent weeks combing the area. Rangers, drones, volunteers, even Tyler's younger brother led hikes across rugged ridgelines. But nothing turned up. No clothes, no gear, no final scream. Etched into a phone recording, only a melted candle stub near a sandstone outcrop, as if the celebration had just ended. After a year, their case went cold. After 3 people stopped asking questions, only their families remembered the date. Then, in the 6th year, on the very same day they vanished, a solo camper named Drew Carlisle wandered half a mile off the marked trail. He had no connection to the case. He was just looking for shade, a place to set down his backpack and eat a granola bar. Instead, under a collapsed ledge, he found something sticking out of the dirt, half buried, barely visible. It was a heart-shaped locket, rusted, cracked, but still sealed shut. Inside, sealed beneath glass, were 2 smiling faces, his Megan and Tyler, wearing the same clothes from that last photo from the day they vanished. And just like that, the silence broke. The morning after their disappearance, the sun rose slowly over the vast ridges of White Rock Canyon. From a distance, the trails looked peaceful, undisturbed, as if nothing had gone wrong. But back at the visitor center, something immediately felt off. The couple, Amanda and Jason McIntyre, hadn't checked out. Their rental car still sat in the gravel lot, covered in a thin layer of desert dust. The Rangers thought maybe they had extended their hike and would show up soon. But by nightfall, the unease began to harden into worry. Amanda's mother, Karen, hadn't heard from her daughter since an early morning text. "We made it." She tried calling again. No response. She tried Jason's number. Straight to voicemail. It wasn't like them. Especially Amanda, who was always careful, always in touch. The 2 had planned every detail of this trip. Even down to the cake Jason had hidden in the trunka. Simple white frosted round cake with 1 year strong scribbled in blue icing. By the following day, a search and rescue operation had launched. Dozens of trained volunteers and park rangers scoured the White Rock trails using drones, dogs, and thermal imaging. They found the picnic spot. A small area off-trail, not far from the ledge overlooking the Colorado River. Left behind were 2 paper plates, a half-empty bottle of champagne, and 2 plastic forks. No backpacks, no cell phones, no signs of a struggle, just an untouched cliffside view, and 1 melted candle burned down into a small wax puddle. Jason's brother, Matt, flew in from Seattle to help with the search. Jason wasn't careless. He insisted during a press conference. He loved Amanda more than anything. They were solid. If he had any way to contact us, he would have. That first week stretched into 2, and then the leads ran dry. Speculation. began to rise. Some believed the couple might have fallen. White Rock Canyon was known for its treacherous loose rocks. Others whispered darker theories: murder, suicide, secret debt, staged disappearance, but the families refused to believe any of it. Amanda had just landed a new position at a local art gallery. Jason had been planning a surprise trip to Mexico for their second anniversary. Nothing about them pointed to despair or escape. Local news outlets covered the story heavily for about a month. Photos of the smiling couple, Amanda with her soft brown curls, Jason in his baseball cap, appeared on every TV screen and community bulletin board. But without fresh evidence, the story slowly faded from headlines. Just another mystery buried in the Nevada sand. 6 years passed. Families aged. Matt got married and had a son. Karen moved into a smaller home. Every now and then, they'd get a blurry photo from a tourist, a story from a hiker, but nothing ever panned out. Until one October afternoon, 29-year-old camper named Trey Peterson was hiking off the designated trail near the eastern ridge of White Rock. He wasn't looking for anything special, just a place to set up his tent. His dog, Dakota, ran ahead, barking at something wedged between a cluster of jagged white stones. Trey thought it was a rattlesnake nest until he got closer. There, half buried in dry silt and tangled roots, was a small heart-shaped locket. The chain was rusted, but the hinge still worked. Inside were 2 miniature photos, faded but visible: Amanda and Jason side by side, smiling on their wedding day. Trey's stomach dropped. The find didn't make sense. This area wasn't anywhere near where search teams had looked, and it wasn't on any popular hiking maps. His hands trembled as he snapped a photo and sent it to the local ranger station. When the news reached Amanda's family, Karen nearly collapsed. She remembered the locket well. It had been her wedding gift to Amanda. No matter where you go, she'd written in the card, "You'll always carry your love with you." Amanda had worn it every day, right up until the day they vanished. Search teams returned to the site that same week. It took them 2 full days to begin excavating what lay beneath the chalky surface: pieces of clothing, collapsed pocket camera, and just beyond a weathered rock outcrop, the mangled remains of what looked like a hiking bag. Still, there were no bones, no bodies, no blood. It only raised more questions. How had the locket ended up there? Who or what had buried it? Why would their belongings be so far from their original trail? As media picked up the story again, theories reemerged, this time more ominous. Had someone lured them off the trail? Had they been hiding from something? Or had they discovered something they weren't supposed to? No one could explain the proximity of the found items, how they were so carefully tucked away as if preserved. But Karen, sitting in her quiet kitchen back in Sacramento, felt something she hadn't felt in 6 years. A flicker, not of hope exactly, but of resolve. This wasn't over. She took the locket back into her hand and stared at the photo inside. They were there, somewhere out there, waiting to be found. The news about the heart-shaped locket found in White Rock Canyon spread quickly through the community. While the object seemed small, its emotional weight was enormous, engraved faintly. On its metal frame were the initials R+L, the same initials from the couple's wedding invitation. Inside, a faded photo showed Rachel and Logan cheek to cheek, with a tiny candle just visible in the corner. Clearly from their first anniversary cake, according to Rachel's mother, the camper who found it had turned the locket in immediately. Local news ran with it. New clue in 6-year-old hiking disappearance. Rekindled public attention and reopened old wounds. Detective Karen Elliott, retired for just over a year, couldn't ignore it. She had led the initial investigation into Rachel and Logan's disappearance. She remembered Linda, Rachel's mother, coming to her every week. She wouldn't have left, not like that, Linda had insisted. Back then, massive search operation combed White Rock Canyon, helicopters, volunteers, dogs, but they found nothing. It was as if the ground had swallowed them. But now, a clue. A real physical clue. Karen visited Linda that evening. The moment Linda saw the photo of the locket, her hand went to her mouth. "I took this," she whispered. That's the morning they left. She stared long at the picture, tears glimmering in. Her eyes, Someone wanted it found. Not back then. Now. That sentence haunted Karen. She reopened the case files. One detail popped out immediately. The original search had focused entirely west of the summit based on an anonymous tip. Male caller claimed he'd seen the couple near Overlook Pass. That tip had never been confirmed, but shaped the entire investigation. But the locket was found far southeast, near a barely maintained path called Sun Shadow Trail. Karen decided to go there herself the next morning. Sun Shadow was overgrown and rarely used. Karen followed its narrow line through thorny scrub and stone. Near a steep ridge, she paused. Something felt wrong. A patch of ground didn't match the rest. She bent down. The dirt was looser. Gently brushing it away, she revealed the edge of red fabric, sun-bleached and brittle. Rachel's favorite jacket had been red. Karen didn't dig further. She took photos and called it in. The area was secured. Search crews returned. Beneath the surface, they uncovered scattered gear, rusted metal, broken straps, and a cell phone, corroded but intact. It belonged to Logan. At the lab, they recovered photos from the phone. One image showed the couple in what looked like a shallow rock cave, smiling but visibly shaken. Rachel's hair was messy. Logan's shirt was torn. The time stamp, 3 days. After they vanished, they hadn't vanished. They were still alive for at least 3 days. But why hadn't they called for help? Karen studied the terrain. The area where they were found wasn't visible from above. Someone had taken them there. Or if they had stumbled there by accident and become trapped. Either way, the mystery was shifting. One thing was now certain. This was never just a missing persons case. The local search effort had dwindled, but not completely vanished. Every year on their anniversary, Samantha's mother still placed fresh flowers at the entrance of the White Rock trailhead. It had become a quiet ritual, her way of whispering into the canyon, hoping somehow her daughter heard. Not everyone had moved on. Brian's younger brother, Luke, had never accepted the silence. He was barely 19 when they disappeared. Too young to be included in the initial planning, too broken to be taken seriously, when he said again and again that something didn't feel right. 6 years later, Luke was a 25-year-old man working odd jobs, mostly electrical maintenance in neighboring counties. He still kept a cardboard box tucked away in his apartment closet, old printouts, maps, screenshots of weather reports, trail logs, Reddit theories, even one blurry still from a gas station camera the day before they vanished. No one had been able to confirm whether the couple had ever arrived at the upper loop of the trail where they were last expected. Then, in September, something changed. It started small. Local wilderness photography blog posted a set of landscape shots from the canyon after a recent flash rain. The water had carved out a fresh wash, eroding part of a narrow ridge far from the marked trails. The photos were beautiful, but Luke saw something different. On the edge of one frame, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for, was a flash of silver half buried in the sediment. He zoomed in. It looked like a hiking pole, old bent, with a worn leather grip. He sent the photo to the ranger station. They said they'd send someone when available. Luke didn't wait. He packed light, left a note for his roommate, and set out early Saturday morning. The place wasn't easy to reach. The path marked on the map ended long before the ground did. Luke had studied the terrain for years. He knew where to veer off, where the rocks changed tone, where the sun cast long shadows over deep ledges. By mid-afternoon, he was crouched near the spot from the photo. The area had clearly shifted. New gullies and collapsed soil had exposed jagged boulders. His eyes scanned the earth, and there it was, the pole, still stuck, but only loosely now. As he tugged it free, his stomach dropped. The grip cracked. And worn, but unmistakable, was identical to the one Brian had ordered from a trail outfitter 6 months before the trip. Luke remembered helping him unpack it. He looked around. Everything was quiet, no bird song, no wind, just the faint sound of water dripping from the canyon wall. He took a deep breath and began carefully checking the surrounding terrain. That's when he noticed the drop, about 15 feet below, hidden behind an outcrop, a natural pocket in the rock, wide enough for a person to hide or to fall. He lowered himself down cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the dim shadows of the overhang. That's when he saw it. The faint shape of something buried in a shallow collapse of sand and rubble. First, a piece of fabric, then the edge of a backpack. Luke didn't touch anything, climbed back up, shaking, and called the local sheriff's office from the ridge. "I think I found them," he said. And suddenly, after 6 long years of waiting, White Rock Canyon was no longer silent. 6 months passed after the discovery of the heart-shaped locket, and despite the initial media frenzy, the story once again began to slip quietly out of public memory. But not for Lana's parents. By now, Linda and Jerry Sanders were living in a rhythm of forced routine. Every Sunday morning, they still packed the old SUV with bottled water, snacks, printed maps, and drove out toward White Rock Canyon. They told people it was to feel close to Lana, but deep down, both were still hoping to see something everyone else had missed. One Sunday in early May, the wind was low, and the desert air carried a strange stillness. Linda had parked the car in their usual spot and began walking one of the lesser-known side trails. She paused near a sun-bleached boulder, bent down, and pressed her hand to it, a habit she'd developed over the last few years. Jerry didn't question it anymore. They sat down in silence. Behind them, the river could be heard faintly gurgling. The sun sat low in the sky. Linda pulled out her phone to glance, but again at a photo saved on her screen as still from their daughter's wedding. Video. Lana and Daniel, both laughing, feeding each other cake. Jerry looked over and sighed. "I just keep thinking," he said. "If they had taken the other trail, maybe they'd have come back." Linda didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mind had wandered to that last voicemail Lana left, the one they had saved and replayed hundreds of times. "We're about to start the hike, Mom. Daniel says this is going to be the best anniversary adventure ever. Love you." Night fell early. Jerry packed up their things and turned to lead the way back. Linda followed slowly, her foot catching on something half buried in the dirt just off the trail. She knelt, brushed it with her hand, and froze. It was a worn-out piece of fabric, navy blue with a faint red stripe running diagonally. It looked like a piece of a jacket. Jerry knelt beside her, his eyes widened. "That's Daniel's jacket," he whispered. "He wore it in college, I remember." They flagged it and drove straight to the ranger station, where an officer met them and noted the coordinates. Within days, a new limited search was launched, not a full-scale one, but enough to send a team of 5 and a dog unit out into that area. The jacket fragment had been too weathered to extract useful DNA, but it matched closely with a hiking photo Lana had posted on her Instagram the day before their trip. Daniel was wearing it. A few days later, something else surfaced. Local hiking group had taken drone footage for a YouTube channel the day Lana and Daniel had gone missing. The footage didn't capture them directly, but it showed a distant image of 2 figures walking along an unmarked ledge heading into a zone marked unstable terrain. One of the rangers noted that the area hadn't been checked thoroughly during the original search due to its erosion risk and difficult access. With the new data point, authorities finally opened up that side of the ridge for reinvestigation. The following weekend, searchers went in on foot with climbing gear and thermal scanners. It was slow and cautious work. On the second day, they found something, not bodies, but a fragment of Lana's scarf tangled in a twisted juniper tree growing between the rocks. It was her favorite scarf, soft beige wool with hand-stitched initials. The terrain there was harsh, almost unnavigable. The edges of the cliffs had eroded over the years, and some gaps looked like they had caved in. Still, there was no conclusive evidence. Nothing yet explained what happened that day. But for Linda and Jerry, this was the closest they'd come to answers in years. Their daughter's scarf, her husband's jacket, these weren't just lost items. They were whispers in the dark, pieces of a truth still hiding in the canyon shadows. And yet, even as the discoveries mounted, the core of the mystery remained sealed. Why had Lana and Daniel left the trail? What had drawn them toward the ridge? And if they fell, why hadn't their remains ever been found? Or worse, what if someone had been waiting there? That question lingered in the air, heavier than the summer heat rolling in. The first fall after their disappearance arrived quietly in White Rock Canyon. Leaves from the higher cliffs drifted down, wind-swept and indifferent, as if nature itself had moved on. But not everyone had. One person hadn't. Rebecca Collins, Anna's mother, still clung to the smallest things, a voicemail Anna had left the night before they vanished, saved on 3 separate devices. A pink hairbrush Anna forgot at her house, just days before the trip, and a white napkin with the words 1 year strong scribbled in blue gel pen, a leftover from the anniversary cake she'd packed for them. She wasn't just holding on, she was drowning in it. Despite the initial chaos, media buzz, and missing persons. Flyers that wallpapered the town, the search had collapsed within months. No bodies, no gear, no phone, pings, just silence. Some said they fell, some said they ran, others cruelly said they planned it all. But Rebecca didn't believe her daughter would ever leave without a word. Anna had called every Sunday, had FaceTimed, just hours before they set off on the hike, laughing at Daniel's poor attempt to pitch their new tent in the backyard as practice. She even showed off the little cake, a tiny 2-tier vanilla sponge with white frosting and blue writing. She made it herself, Rebecca often whispered to herself. It's like repeating it would summon the past back into the present. But in year 6, something shifted. Not in the case, but in Rebecca. She stopped visiting the ranger's office every month, stopped fighting with Daniel's mother, who had long since moved out of state, stopped calling Anna's old number. One day, she packed away everything into a single large cedar chest and shoved it deep into the attic. She didn't stop loving them. She just stopped fighting the silence. But the silence wasn't finished yet. Ranger Corey Bennett had worked the area for 2 decades. He remembered the case. Everyone did. But now, White Rock Canyon had changed, not just in topography, but in mood. Since that couple went missing, a superstition had grown in whispers. Couples shouldn't hike the loop trail. Locals said it like a half-joke, but nobody laughed. One autumn morning, Bennett got a call from a man camping a few miles off the loop trail. A hiker had gone too deep into the off-trail woods and found what he called something strange. Man wasn't panicked, just unsettled. Bennett hiked out and found him waiting beside an old cottonwood tree. The man didn't say much, just pointed. At first glance, Bennett saw nothing. But a few feet beyond the thicket, partially buried under loose rock and overgrown roots, was a weathered wooden box, not locked, but aged, the kind of box people used to store keepsakes. Inside was a torn corner of what looked like a waterproof map. And beneath that, something else. A folded piece of wax paper with a drawing on it. The paper was stained, but the ink was intact. 2 stick figures holding hands, a jagged heart between them, and the words first adventure in childish handwriting. Bennett didn't say anything out loud, but his mind immediately returned to the couple, Daniel and Anna. The word adventure had come up often in their social media posts. Their trip had been dubbed their first married adventure. The connection was thin but chilling. And then there was the drawing. Was it Anna's? Was it someone else's? And why buried in a box miles off any trail? The finding wasn't enough to reopen the case publicly. There was no evidence, no leads. But quietly, Bennett reopened the file, and Rebecca, after years of dormancy, got a call she never expected. At first her voice cracked. "I thought this was over," she said. "It might be nothing," Bennett said gently, "but I thought you'd want to know." She visited the ranger's office the next day. She hadn't been there in 4 years, still smelled like pine, paper, and distant regrets. When he handed her the drawing, her hand trembled. She stared at it for nearly a minute, then slowly nodded. "That's Anna's handwriting," she said softly. "She used to draw that same heart in high school. It's crooked, like it's breaking." And then she said something that stayed with him. She wouldn't leave that behind unless someone made her. Later that week, another hiker, an amateur photographer, submitted something odd to an online hiking group, a photo he'd taken 6 months earlier of a strange carving in a tree near the outer ridge of White Rock Canyon. It looked like initials A+D inside a poorly shaped heart. He hadn't thought anything of it until now. Investigators quietly marked the tree, but it brought them no closer to answers. For every new piece, the puzzle only seemed more impossible. Why leave clues in the woods? Why the drawing? Why now? And then in the coming weeks, as temperatures dropped and hikers grew scarce, one final clue emerged. A man walking his dog along the ravine path near the lower basin reported seeing something unusual after a small rock slide. It wasn't a body or bone. It was metal. The object was retrieved the next morning, an old-fashioned cake cutter rusted, but intact, engraved with two faint letters, A and D. It had been a gift from Anna's grandmother, the one she insisted they bring along for their celebration. Rebecca had wrapped it in a tea towel. She remembered placing it in their picnic bag. Now, 6 years later, it was back, cold, rusted. Unearthed, the silence was starting to speak, but it wasn't finished yet. There was something about that silence that began to disturb Officer Rains. It had been nearly 6 years, and not a single new piece of evidence had come forward, not one credible sighting, not one strange phone call, not even a wrongly assumed identity. Couples vanished from the world in tragic ways sometimes. But not like this, not leaving behind a perfectly parked car, a clean record, and a pair of loving families who knew them well enough to swear something just wasn't right. The deeper he went through their case file again, the more quiet pressure built in his chest. He'd combed the White Rock Canyon himself, walked those trails, watched the terrain shift with the seasons. But no gear, no remains, no dropped items. It was like the earth had swallowed them whole. Molly's mother, Denise, was still writing too. Local paper editors on anniversaries, begging for space to keep her daughter's photo in public view. She never stopped using present tense. "My daughter is kind," she'd say. "She loves the outdoors. It was always is, never was." And each time Rains read her words, something in him twisted. In his gut, he began to suspect that whatever happened to Jacob and Molly didn't happen far from where they were last seen. Maybe it never even left that canyon. A few miles from the last known sighting, tucked between a lesser-traveled path, known as Rims Hollow, the terrain sloped down into a narrow basin. Most hikers avoided it. It was steep, had no formal trail markers, and was overgrown with sharp desert shrubs, but it had a strange quietness to it, the kind that felt intentional. Rains had looked at it once early on, and marked it off because of a landslide reported around the time of their disappearance. Now he wondered if that had been a mistake. But before he could act on that instinct, a new name entered the picture. A seasonal camper named Tyler Boone had arrived in the area for his yearly escape into nature. Every spring, he'd disappear into Nevada's wilder spaces for weeks. He never brought much with him, just a tent, a journal, and an old tin pot passed down from his grandfather. Tyler didn't check news. He didn't carry a phone. He walked trails no longer listed in official maps, and he hadn't been to White Rock. In 6 years, he never meant to find anything. He wasn't looking. But on the third day of his hike, in the early morning light, his boot caught on something hard, buried under loose shale. When he dug, he didn't know why. When he uncovered the object, he didn't scream. He simply stared. It was a heart-shaped silver locket opened. It's containing 2 photos. One of a young man with brown hair and wide dimples, the other of a smiling woman with auburn curls. On the back was a faint engraving, "Forever, April 18th, 2016. He didn't know it yet, but what Tyler had found would unravel everything. Back in town, Denise Monroe was folding towels when her landline rang. She picked up, expecting a telemarketer, but the woman's voice on the other end didn't ask about donations. "Ma'am," she said gently, "are you the mother of Molly Monroe?" Denise's knees nearly buckled, because no one had asked her that in a long time. Denise hadn't cried in years, not real tears, not the kind that swell up without permission, blurring your sight and burning your throat. But after that call, she sat on her kitchen floor, hand-gripping the receiver, and sobbed like it was day one all over again. She didn't hear all the details at first, only that a camper had found something, a locket. And the ranger on the phone said there was no question whose it was. They'd confirmed it from photos in the missing persons file. The locket had belonged to Molly. 6 years, and suddenly, just like that, there it was. Less than 5 miles from where they'd parked their car. The news spread like a ripple. Officer Rains was notified immediately. He hadn't retired yet. Something in him wouldn't let go. He was already driving to White Rock before the call was over. The trail was reopening itself, piece by piece, in. His head, Tyler Boone, the camper who'd found the locket, met them at the edge of Rim's Hollow. He was quiet, sincere, and almost embarrassed at the attention. "I just wanted someone to know," he said. "I wasn't sure it meant anything, but Rains knew better." It cordoned off the area quickly. Search dogs were brought in drones, ground penetrating. Radar. It wasn't just a lost locket anymore. It was a location, a timestamp, a reason to hope, and a reason to fear. Within 2 days, something else was found. Buried under compacted earth and loose shale was a canvas strap and a broken hiking pole, then something metal glinting in the sun. They cleared it gently, inch by inch. The dust made it hard to see at first, but there it was, the outline of a camping backpack, torn and sun-bleached, and beneath it, tangled in twisted roots, were bones, small, human, long decayed by time and weather. They stopped the dig immediately. Forensics were called in, and Denise, who had stayed away from White Rock for all these years, stood silently near the edge of the search site, her arms wrapped around herself like armor. Rain stood beside her, his jaw tight. "They told me she might have run away," she said softly, "that maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe they went off the grid." He didn't respond. "They never really believed something bad happened," she added. "Not really." He still didn't respond. But this time, he didn't have to. The silence said it all. Across the way, under the open Nevada sky, men in gloves and masks worked carefully, respectfully. They weren't rushing. They were gathering fragmenta. Story in reverse, being unearthed. No one said it aloud, but Denise could feel it. This was her daughter, or at least it had been. As the team wrapped evidence bags, one technician paused and turned to Rains. "You're going to want to see this," he said, from under the backpack. They'd found something else, a compact black notebook, still damp, the edges curled, but pages surprisingly intact inside. The initials J+M were carved on the inside cover. It wasn't written by a stranger. It was Jacob's handwriting. Whatever happened on that trail 6 years ago, someone had written it down. But the answers inside would take time to dry, to decode, to read without bias. And for Denise, it was the waiting that hurt most. She didn't want a true crime explanation. She didn't want scandal or headlines. She just wanted to know why. The pages were brittle, but the ink it held. The forensic archivist treated it like a relic, gently drying each sheet, photographing and scanning before anyone was allowed to read a word. It was Jacob's handwriting, no doubt sharp loops, neat lines, and the slightly slanted way he dotted his I's. Denise had recognized it immediately. She remembered the countless sticky notes he used to leave on the fridge or tucked into Molly's purse, little love notes, always signed J. But these weren't love notes, were entry short, dated paragraphs, as if he'd kept her running. Log during their hike. The first few pages were mundane. Descriptions of the trail, of the wind through the canyon, of the way Molly had laughed when a lizard startled her near the ridge. He wrote about their anniversary picnic, how she'd cried when he gave her a small ring with their wedding date carved inside. Then the tone changed. Jacob mentioned that a man had passed them on the trail earlier than expected. Just before sunrise, tall, silent, no backpack, nothing in his hands. Molly had smiled at him, but he didn't smile back. "Weird guy," Jacob wrote, didn't say a word. Looked like he didn't belong out here. A few pages later, Jacob recorded something more troubling. "We heard someone moving outside our tent around 3 a.m. Thought it was a coyote when I stepped out with the flashlight. There were fresh prints in the dust boot treads. Not mine, not hers. Just one set circling the tent." Denise's hands trembled as she reached that entry. She'd sat in the sheriff's office reading the scans. The light above her buzzed faintly, but she didn't notice. She couldn't look away. The next few pages were frantic, rushed handwriting. "Someone is following us. We've doubled back on the trail. Molly is scared. I'm scared. Whoever it is, they're not making themselves known. I saw him again near the bluff, just standing. Didn't move, just stared." Jacob had stopped dating the pages after that. A note scribbled in the margin of one, "If we don't make it out, this wasn't an accident. Please tell our parents. Please tell them we fought to get away." That was when Denise had to leave the room. Later, investigators confirmed that the locket had likely been ripped from Molly's neck during a struggle. It wasn't found gently placed. It was half buried, caught in a clump of disturbed earth. And then came the final discovery. About 40 yards from where the backpack had been found, near a steep drop-off, searchers uncovered another shallow depression in the rock-studded ground. It was Jacob. His body had been wedged under a collapsed overhang, bones fractured in ways that matched blunt force trauma. His wedding ring was still on. A dent in the metal hinted he'd raised his hand in defense. There was no sign of Molly's remains. But under Jacob's collarbone, lodged in the dirt, they found something else as silver. Zippo lighter with initials scratched faintly across the side. Not his, not hers. No known connection in any database. But Rains had seen enough in his decades to suspect this man had a pattern, one that might not end here. Denise was told the truth gently, that Jacob had tried to protect Molly, that something terrible happened in that canyon, that someone might have hunted them, not randomly, but purposefully. The media would call it a cold case, reopened. For Denise, it was her son-in-law's final act of love, scribbled words in a torn notebook buried beneath 6 years of silence. But one question haunted her every night since. Where was Molly? The desert, for all its harshness, keeps secrets with patience. Some blow away with the wind. Others sink slowly beneath the sand, waiting for time or grief to stir them back up. It was Denise who made the final trip out to White Rock Canyon that fall. She stood by the ledge where Jacob's remains had been found. The sun was just beginning to dip, casting long shadows that danced across the pale rock. In her hand, she clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked nearby, purple, yellow, and soft white, the kind Molly would have liked. The search for her daughter hadn't ended, not in spirit. But in her heart, Denise had reached a quiet understanding. She may never hold Molly again, may never hear her laugh or see her smile, but she now knew what Jacob had done. He had tried to save her, fought for her, and something about that made the ache a little more bearable. The sheriff's office had closed the case quietly, officially listed as probable homicide, perpetrator unknown. They hadn't found enough forensic evidence on the lighter to identify anyone. The stranger on the trail remained nameless, a shadow. But Detective Rains, now retired, had told Denise one thing she never repeated aloud. There had been similar disappearances, not many, always remote, always couples, never solved. It was a thread too faint to follow, but enough to keep her watchful. Denise returned to her home and kept the recovered notebook in a sealed glass case alongside the locket, the lighter, and a single photo of Molly and Jacob on their wedding day, her in lace. Him with that crooked smile, both so young, so alive. The video from the camper's phone had gone viral. News stations picked it up. But as quickly as the internet swarmed, it moved on. Denise didn't. She still walked the trail near her town each morning, still made 2 cups of tea some nights out. Of habit, still checked the mail every day, hoping for nothing in particular. And every year on the anniversary of their disappearance, she drove out to the edge of the canyon and sat silently, waiting for the wind to speak. Because somewhere, out there, in the wide hush of stone and sky, the rest of the story still lingered.